All right, the goal right now is to demonstrate the process I go about installing some curly maple binding onto this headstock. So this is for an octave mandolin. The rest of the body is going to have curly maple binding, and so the client and I discussed yesterday that let's just do the headstock too. So I figure this is a good opportunity to demonstrate that. So I've gone ahead and milled down curly maple binding, really nicely figured. I don't know if the camera picks up on it. Anyway, it's nicely figured. And I've gone ahead and done a lot of the removing the material so that I'd have the binding channel already done. But I'll quickly go through that process that I do. So assuming this had all the ebony head plate intact, what I would do is I would take the thickness of the binding, and I use, let's set the camera up here. What I do, sorry about that. I use this, I'm not really sure the name of it. I'm gonna call it a useful tool. I use this useful tool. And what you can do is with an Allen wrench, access right here. And then right here, you can adjust the blade depth and then the distance between this curved side and then how much the blade can be out or come in. So I've gone ahead and set the thickness of the binding. And then what you do is you hold this flush against the side and then you score a line. And each pass, it goes deeper and deeper into the headstock veneer. And then I'll use just like a chisel, make sure it's super sharp. And I'll kind of slowly remove material down to where the score line from the useful tool ends. I'll also use these little dog ear chisels. They're super useful too for kind of the last bit to kind of work material away. And then sometimes if you have the bottom super sharp and level, I'll kind of hold the blade parallel and kind of use that as a scraper. And that kind of gives you a nice clean edge, nice clean corner that the binding will fit into. The binding channel is prepped, and for this headstock shape, it's gonna basically you're gonna have to bend the two curves here, and then mainly curve this and the top on the heating iron. So I've gone ahead and heated that up, and I'll show how I go about bending the binding. For material with this much figure and the thickness, it's not going to need much water, if any. I do have a dish of water, and I'll just kind of put my hands in the water and kind of run it the length of the binding, just so it creates some steam, just because the steam is going to help loosen those cells and the fibers and make it more pliable. You could opt to just not use water, but it's going to make it a little more brittle and I think increased chance of snapping. So let me go ahead and turn things around here. All right, so I've had the heating iron on for about 5 minutes. And safety too is I also have a fire extinguisher handy, so always make sure you're gonna have one handy before you start using this. Here's a dish of water. I just kind of put my hands in, and then doesn't take much, just kind of run it the length of the binding. And then I have a piece of spring steel, and that is just to be backing for it. And I'll just kind of lightly press. And initially when I press the binding against the heating iron, I don't apply much pressure. I want the wood to warm up and kind of be aware of that it's going to be bending. And you'll kind of hear the steam being created and sizzling off. And if you just kind of like relax your grip, you can actually kind of feel the wood fibers relax and become more pliable. So that's kind of what I'm waiting for. There will be a color change in the wood from where it's wet to where it's dried out. And so obviously it's dried out where I was pressing against the bending iron. So then I'll just put my hand back in the dish of water and then get the wood wet again. And then I'll put this back onto the heating iron in the same spot that I was working on bending it. Kind of see it's already been forming. And I don't know if you can hear it, but it's sizzling and creating steam. And I'll slowly work it the length that's needed for that kind of sharp radius near the top of the headstock. And then hope it doesn't snap. And right now I'm just kind of slowly just kind of pressing it against. And where I'm applying the most pressure is where my left thumb is. Everything else I'm kind of letting hover right above the heating iron, so that all kind of becomes pliable. But where my thumb is pressing in, that's where it's going to make the biggest or the longer lasting bend in the curly maple. So let's see. So you can see, compared to when we started, things to be aware of is when you're bending figured wood is, the grain's basically going in so many different directions. So you want to make sure that it's not splitting where you're bending. Sometimes it sands out and is fine, but if I start to see a split occurring, I don't see any here. But what I'll do is I will actually use like a piece of wood, and I will, when I get to that point in the curly maple, actually like firmly press against that to have like even more kind of backing behind it. And I find usually that keeps it from splitting even more. You don't have to use spring steel. It's just helpful, and it heats up nicely, and so it actually warms up the side of the binding that's not in contact with the bending iron. But sometimes just like a block of wood and your fingers can work. So this was a piece of wood that Arlo drew on, so that's what the marker is. It's like a Minecraft thing or something. But I'm kind of just letting the wood dictate how it wants to bend or not bend. And once I feel like it's gotten to the shape I want it to be, I'll actually just hold it an extra few seconds to kind of like really make sure that bend stays. So let's see. So yeah, that looks pretty good. What we're gonna do, I just checked it on the headstock itself. It's actually that's more of a bend than we need. So if that happens, no big deal. I just go back to the bending iron, and you kind of just reverse what you've done. So I'll take this part, which was the outer part, and I will just dip my finger in the water, put some water, and then I will press it against, and then just kind of rock it back and forth. and it's gonna, again, warm up the wood fibers and the cells, and they'll become flexible, and I'll very carefully expand that bend and curve. You can see it's not as sharp as it was. Let's check it over here quickly. And that looks good. All right, so what I'll do, if there's any water left on it, like there is, I will actually, just to kind of speed up the drying time, the flat top of this bending iron, I'll kind of just run it along and cause the water to evaporate. It doesn't take much, just kind of a few passes. And that way it keeps any moisture and excess water off of the headstock material. Kind of speeds the process along. I'm not applying any pressure, so I'm not like messing the bend up. I'm just kind of making sure it comes in contact with the bending iron, and a little bit of water that was on it is steaming off nicely. All right, that's good. All right, turn that off, and back around. I'll show you how it fits. All right, looks good. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a couple pieces of this tape so I can show you. All right, so as you can see, thanks for bearing with me. This is the bend that we were doing on the heating iron. This part is just straight, and then the slight gradual bend. As you can see, it fits in real nicely. And it sits nice and flush along that edge. What I'm gonna do is let this kind of dry before I glue it in. Maybe for like an hour or so. But what I'll do is I'll also tape this curve part right here where my two fingers are, and just make sure it's seated in there. When I trim it to length, I'll actually leave excess on this end, and then over here I'll leave excess because I'm not sure yet how I want to do the miter from how it comes up here and here, and so I'll probably overthink that excessively. So basically it's repeating the same process for the other side, and then for these two parts right here and the top. So that's more or less the process I use. I think that looks pretty good. And up in the next day or so, I'll have the whole headstock bound with the curly maple, and you'll be able to see what it looks like.